Hi everyone, my name is Stephanie Mehta. I'm editor-in-chief of Fast Company, and we are so excited to be here. Today we're going to have a great conversation about the evolving role of business in society. And to help us dig into this topic, we have a tremendous panel. Neil Blumenthal is co-CEO and co-founder of Warby Parker, a company that pioneered the direct-to-consumer business model, but also really inspired a whole generation of startups to think about the intersection of business and purpose. Welcome, Neil.
Thanks for having me.
Ken Chenault is chairman and managing director at Catalyzed and co-founder with Ginny Rometty and Ken Frazier of 110, which we're going to hear about a little bit more in just a moment. Ken is also the former chairman and CEO of American Express. Welcome, Ken.
Great to be here.
Maurice Jones is CEO of 110, which is a coalition of companies dedicated to creating 1 million jobs for African Americans over the course of the next 10 years. He was president and CEO of the Local Initiatives Support Corporation, which was a national community development financial institution. Great to have you, Maurice.
Thanks for having me.
And last but not least, Julie Sweet is CEO of Accenture and a member of that company's board of directors. And Accenture is also a member of the 110. Under Julie's leadership, Accenture has undertaken a number of major initiatives to ensure workplace equity and diversity. So it's great to have you, Julie.
Thanks. Great to virtually be there. I guess this is the new world.
Well, let's just dive right in. Ken, you spent 37 years at American Express and served as chairman and CEO from 2001 to 2018. And you're actively involved in your role at Catalyzed as in advising CEOs and leaders of companies. How has the role of business in society evolved in that time?
I think the role of business obviously has evolved because in many respects, business has been forced to confront the social issues. And I think what's very important is I have always had a firm belief that companies exist because society allows us to exist. And we have a responsibility. And I think what's important is the history of corporations being involved. This may be a little known fact, but Tom Watson, the CEO of IBM, spoke out against separate but equal. And in fact said his factories in North Carolina would not be separate but equal, would not be segregated. In fact, they had to be integrated. And I think what's important is that business is increasingly recognizing that they have to have a positive impact on our society, and particularly if companies are focused on long term, we need a very healthy society to in fact be successful. But it's also because it's the right thing to do.
And we've seen time and time again that the right thing to do often aligns with shareholder values. And I want to come back to that a little bit in a moment to get a little bit of that give and take that you're having with shareholders. But let me go to Julie, because a lot of the initiatives that you've undertaken, as we referenced in the introduction, have been about making Accenture a more fair and equitable place to work. When you initiate these policies, you're obviously thinking about your employees, but are you thinking about the larger message that you're sending to society and the larger message you're sending to your peer corporations?
Well, let's start with what the purpose of a corporation is. And long before people have talked about stakeholder capitalism at Accenture, we've always believed that we needed to serve, yes, our shareholders, but also our own people, our communities, and our partners. And so, as you know, the Business Roundtable, now it's about maybe 2 years ago, also officially did that in the US. But if you serve your communities, then you have to think about beyond your four walls. And for me, that comes down to trust and relevance, right? So are we trusted? And are we relevant as to what we're doing and speaking out about and influencing?
Yeah. Neil, you run a privately held company, so you don't have the external shareholders that Ken had at American Express or that Julie has as Accenture. But as I said at the beginning, Warby Parker really did pioneer this notion with buy a pair, give a pair, and some of the other initiatives that you've launched during the pandemic of business with purpose. What impact do you think you've had on the communities you've served over the course of the company's history?
It's been varied. So one thing is that we've distributed over 8 million pairs of glasses to people around the world, including here in New York City. So hopefully there's a lot of people that can see and lead full lives because of that. But our hope is to be an example to other businesses that shows that you can do well by doing good. And we think a lot about our stakeholders, and it comes down to what motivates us to come to work every day and not want to roll over and hit the snooze button. And it's about having an impact, to Ken's points, being on the right side of history when we all sort of look back on what did we do every day.
Maurice, we're going to dig into the 110 case study in a few minutes, but your experiences span the private sector, non-governmental, and governmental. What are the opportunities, but also the risks of businesses playing such an outsized role in some cases in societal change? We've seen all of the different surveys, including the Edelman Trust Barometer, that show that consumers and citizens in some cases trust business more than government or more than other institutions. That's great for the business people who are nodding their heads at this table, but what are the risks to society when there's an almost outsized amount of trust in business over those other legs of the stool?
Yeah. So first, business has always played a huge role, right, in the American experiment, right, going back to the days of railroads, right, and coming up to, you were at the Virginian Pilot. Frank Batten Sr., who was the publisher and the CEO of the Pilot, was the guy who rallied the business community so that the business community actually resisted Virginia's efforts to resist integrating the schools, right? So business, in my mind, is you can't have a functional democracy if business doesn't play. That's the first thing. The risk of outsized trust in business versus government and the nonprofit sector, but particularly government now, is that you don't really have a co-equal, co-functional partner to both partner with business and, frankly, to bring the messiness of the political voice to the table as well. And so we need to make sure that citizens, that residents trust the public sector as well as the private sector and are willing to make the investments in the public sector for the public sector to be a high-functioning partner. Because if they are not, business won't be able to solve these problems by themselves. You have got to have a high-functioning public sector at the table with the private sector to solve the big problems that we're talking about now. So that's the risk. It's the underinvestment in the one partner that can doom everything if we don't have trust in both places.
Well, and the businesses at this table and the businesses that participate in Aspen Ideas Festival like events, these are companies that are speaking a message of purpose. They are speaking a message of stakeholder capitalism. Not every business is on that journey.
That's right.
Ken, let's talk a little bit about why you founded 110, and then we can bring Maurice into the conversation to talk a little bit about the way you achieve the goals of that journey.
Yeah, I think what was very important is literally the day after the murder of George Floyd, Ken Frazier and I were talking about what could we do as individuals, but also, very importantly, what could the corporate sector do? And we quickly enlisted Jenny Rometty, Kevin Scherer, and Charles Phillips, and we also were able to engage Bain & Company, pro bono, to develop an approach and strategy. And what we thought was where we could really have an impact were on those Black Americans who, in fact, did not go to college. But then also when you look at the jobs, the reality is, and Maurice will go through this, high percentage of those jobs really do not require a college degree. And so when people talk about systemic racism, an example is you're doing the same thing and you're getting the same result. And so there was a recognition that we've got to be more innovative, and that really is what 110 is all about.
And so Maurice, build on that a little bit. A plan has been laid out. You've got really great minds working on this issue. How do you get organizations to make that mindset shift to say, okay, these are jobs where we don't necessarily need to hire people with college educations. I mean, these are big institutions that have systems in place, and they probably use algorithms to look at resumes. There's not someone there kind of looking for that special spark in someone. How do you get past all of the barriers to entry that that African Americans have traditionally faced when looking for these roles?
Yeah, well, it starts with leadership. It starts with a Julie Sweet saying, okay, we're going to look at our jobs, and we're going to look at those that require a 4-year degree, and we're going to do the hard work of really putting it on the table. Do we need a 4-year degree to actually get this job done? And we're going to move to a skills-based assessment. So, and Julie can talk more about this, but I think Accenture now is at about 48%, if I recall, Julie, of your jobs requiring 4-year degrees. Well, that took years, right? And that took, first and foremost, leadership, right? And so what's beautiful about the coalition for me is you've got a committed group of CEOs and CHROs who are committed to doing the hard work of making the corporate environments more inclusive, more diverse, removing these systemic, often invisible barriers that have kept folks out of the workplace, talented blacks and others out of the workplace. And by the way, if you look at the labor market today in the country, 66% of the workforce doesn't have a 4-year degree. 76% of black talent doesn't have a 4-year degree. So what we have is a systemic barrier that is keeping folks out of the middle class. Where you have to start with is leadership who says, we can do something about this.
The other thing I would add that was very important about 110 is not just an alignment on objectives, but a 10-year commitment. And I think what happens with some diversity initiatives, they may be well-meaning, but they don't have the metrics, which is very important, and there's not a long-term commitment.
The other key to success, and Julie, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is retention. So you do the hard work of bringing in a cohort of employees that are super qualified for the job, have the right skill sets, but this will be a new cultural environment for a lot of first-time employees to a company like Accenture. How do you make sure that people who come in through 110 or any other number of programs that are designed to create more equitable workplaces, how do you make sure that those individuals feel welcome and stay and get what they need to succeed?
It's a great question, and it starts with the premise under 110 of partnership and collective learning, right? So first of all, we're not inventing something new. There's actually been a lot of this work. We moved to skills-based because we had a business necessity to do so 3 years ago. Right, and so the whole premise of 110 is we share the learnings. We don't have to build it all ourselves. And in your question, we started, I guess, in 2015 an apprenticeship program in professional services. And what we learned from that program is that you needed to work with partners to help those who maybe didn't have the background, they had the ability but not the experience to work in a new environment. Early on we had individuals who didn't know how to manage a credit card, for example, and so by partnering and by understanding the talent and the people that you're doing, everything is about individual humans, right? Like actual people, and say, okay, here's the extra learning that's necessary. Here's the organization will provide support. And we're going community by community at 110 to tap into the talent needs in that community, but also the partnerships and the learning about what makes it. Because at the end of the day, jobs are local. Right, and so it's moving away from themes and trends to individuals, what have we learned? What are the local partnerships that will help make people successful? And I just want to emphasize, having data, goals, and plans is absolutely critical.
Neil, how do you as a CEO prioritize the societal issues that you and Warby Parker are going to engage with? We're talking about racial equity, but in addition, Warby Parker is a signatory to a number of different initiatives to preserve voting rights. We've talked a little bit about buy a pair, give a pair. How do you think about the issues in society that are the right ones for you personally to tackle and for Warby Parker to attach its name to?
It's challenging, right? Because there's only so many hours in the day. We sell glasses, contacts, and eye exams. So we're not going to solve all the world's problems, but where we can have impact is in the communities in which we operate, in the industries in which we operate. We can affect issues that impact our employees and that are important to them. And part of this is altruistic. We want to affect positive change. And part of it is a labor strategy, a talent strategy, right? It's a tight labor market. We want people to come and work for us. And they want to work at a place that they believe in the values and the impact that they're having. So, when we're thinking what to engage in, it's where can we have impact. So if we look at systemic racism, right, we're not going to be able to solve all systemic racism, but if we look at one of the industries we operate in, the optical industry, less than 3% of optometrists in America are Black. Why is that? What can we do to affect change? We hire a lot of optometrists. We can be part of that change. So can we start by raising awareness around the profession in Black communities, so doing career fairs at historically Black colleges and universities, then working with optometry schools and engaging our diversity, equity, and inclusion teams and sharing best practices around inclusion at schools, so that way Black optometry students can thrive, and then provide financial support, so that way there's scholarships now for Black students at one of our closest partners is the New England College of Optometry. So we can, to Julie's part, sort of monitor and look at data. We look at our own data and look at diversity across Warby Parker at all different seniority levels in all different professions, and really start to move the needle here.
Yeah. Neil, you mentioned employees, and that does seem to be a factor in leadership that has really evolved again over the course of the last 20 years, but really it feels like in the last 5 to 10 years. How do you manage employee expectations around societal involvement? Because I'm sure you get an email a day saying, why aren't you weighing in on this particular issue? What's Warby Parker's position on, something that's happening overseas? How do you manage through that, and how do you make sure employees feel like they're heard, but also understand that, as you said, you can't tackle every issue?
Yeah, so it's funny that you mentioned expectations. I'm constantly telling our team that our job is to create happiness for customers, and happiness equals reality minus expectations. So as we do a good job for our customers, expectations increase, and we need to constantly exceed that and create a better reality. Well, the same is true for CEOs in terms of creating happy employees and team members and creating that reality better than expectations. And at the end of the day, you need a clear strategy, you need to articulate it, and strategy is what you say no to. So we try and spend a lot of time saying, these are the issues we're engaging in, this is our plan, this is how we're measuring success, just as we would any other part of the business, whether it's contact lens sales or the number of eye exams that we're providing and the customer satisfaction related to that.
Julie, Accenture hires thousands of college graduates a year. In your time at Accenture, have you seen a generational shift? Do you think that the young people coming out of college today have different expectations about the role of business in society than the cohort that you guys hired 10 years ago, or the cohort that came up with your peers?
We actually don't see much of a generational difference other than perhaps a willingness to speak up earlier and louder. Because at the end of the day, we start with people. These are all real issues that touch you, whether, whatever generation. And, one of the things we just encourage when we think about what we're doing, whether it's, in COVID, providing care for parents who had kids who were out of school, or if it's around, racial equity and providing opportunities, we start with the person, right? And I think too often, and this was true when, remember a few years ago, it was all about work-life balance and the new young generation. Well, guess what? Those of us who were in the older generation, we wanted work-life balance too. We just hadn't maybe spoken about it, but there wasn't really a multi-generational. These are societal issues that matter to everyone. And so I think we need to be careful to think that it's, only the young people, and that's not what we see both with our 540,000 people around the world and in the research we do.
We've talked about employees, we've talked about potential employees. Ken, I want to come back to the issue of shareholders. When the Business Roundtable announced its statement of purpose, as Julie noted, about almost 2 years ago now, there were some shareholders, stockholders, who were not particularly happy to see that statement of purpose announced. And I wonder, what the reaction of the CEO, particularly the publicly traded company CEO, should be to push back from shareholders who feel like we deserve primacy. We should be the first seat at the table.
Right. I think one is it's important to give context to how value is generated. And I go back to some of these same investors may have issues with CEOs who say, I'm focused on the long term. We all know we need to execute in the short term, but we sometimes make decisions that, in fact, are not in the short term benefits financially to the company. And so, very frankly, what I've seen with some of the major institutional investors is they're now very much involved with saying, what positions are you taking? What are you doing relative to climate change? What are you doing relative to diversity? So what I think is very important is the CEO has to be a leader. And what they have to say is, this is what the mission of the company is about. We're focused on generating long-term, sustainable financial performance, but also we understand that we need to contribute to improving society. And it's also one of the reasons why one of the things that we're very focused on at General Catalyst is this concept of what we call responsible innovation, where we think at the beginning, companies need to, in fact, do almost a form of social due diligence. Put into your strategies right in the beginning, what are you doing relative to diversity? What are you doing relative to the environment? How are you thinking about privacy? Because it's very important that this is not just a big company issue. And I think that's what's critical. What Neil and Dave have been able to do at Warby is from the beginning, they had that focus. And I'm seeing that increasingly with companies that are now being created.
For a startup, and Neil, jump in here, what are the compromises, or what are the things that you need to spend a little bit more time on if you are going to have purpose built in at the core at an early stage? I think about all of the things that startups, all of the excuses startups will give you for why we have to move fast. We can't think about a diverse coding base because we have to hire really quickly, and we have to hire now, and there's just no time for us to find a diverse slate. How do you counterbalance the need for speed, which is real at startups?
Right. Yeah, so let me be clear. I think sense of urgency has to be there, but you also have to have mindfulness of impact. And I think what's very important, and I say this often to founders, is you want to innovate in a business, you've got societal issues that you need to bring some of that innovative thinking to. And what's very important is you got to be thoughtful. So any startup will tell you they need to be very focused on bringing in high quality people. High quality, high performance, high integrity. Why not say at the beginning, I want to make sure I'm bringing in diverse people. And I'm not going to compromise on my criteria, but that is part of what our company is going to be. And so I think it goes back to understanding the mission of your company, the purpose of your company, that you really do want to create an environment where all people can thrive. You can't say, I'm going to ignore all those issues, but 10 years later, when I'm successful, then I'm going to really focus on these issues. That's not the way you can operate.
Yeah, the question is, do you want to build a great company or not? Do you want to
Absolutely.
ship great products? And we know that if you want to build high-performing teams, they need to be diverse and inclusive. And if you don't start tackling these challenges earlier, it just gets more and more difficult as the larger you get.
And I think to Neil's point, it's hard to do this. It's hard to build a great company. But if you really are ambitious, that's what you want to do.
Maurice, when you're onboarding companies at 110, or when a new company is potentially interested in joining the coalition, what are the things that you stress test them about? What are the things that you're looking for that underscore that a company really does have a commitment to 110, but more broadly, to being a force for good in society?
Yeah. Well, certainly looking for the CEO to be on board, to be unabashed about it, and to be willing to invest his or her time.
You might mention, Maurice, sort of the rule we have for CEOs engagement.
So we have a community of practice, and that is a CEO and CHRO engagement, right? No substitutes. You cannot send a substitute to participate in and Julie was mentioning the community of practice that we have. So we want CEO commitment, CEO investment of time. We look for that from the outset. Secondly, we also are really looking for, to Julie's point, to a sense of goals, right? What goals do you have for jobs, in this case, for Black talent without four-year degrees? What goals for promotions? What goals do you have with respect to trying to re-credential? So we're looking for folks who can articulate at least a hypothesis at the beginning as to what aspirations they're aspiring to. And then thirdly, for us, it is important for folks to have a sense of the need for change, that this is not about continuing what we have been doing for umpteen generations, producing the outcomes that we have, but that folks themselves want to change their enterprises, but also change America. We are looking for folks who know that this effort is about transformation, not continuation. Those things are in place. I'm feeling pretty good about the prospects.
Julie, how does that kind of message resonate inside the walls of Accenture? You know, I've got to imagine that being able to tell your leadership team, tell your employees that you're engaged in an initiative to change America, that's got to be really powerful. I'd love for you to expand a little on what Maurice just said about, you know, the power of being part of a coalition like this.
Well, you know, Neil talked about it earlier when he said we're in a talent war. You know, people want to be parts of companies that have a purpose and that walk the talk, which I think is really important, right? So I talked earlier about trust and relevance. Well, trust comes from seeing, you know, being a company that actually does what they say, not just making a commitment. And 1 in 2 employees want to work with at companies who are doing meaningful things to help society, right? So we're all in the midst of, trying to get the very, very best talent. And so that really means then that with your own employees and to attract employees, they want to see this, but they don't want just words. I mean, we just put out on the anniversary of George Floyd's murder, our progress report from the actions we committed a year ago to say we said we were going to do these 3 things, and we are publicly telling you exactly where we are. And we made progress with Black Americans. We made progress with the training we did. We made progress with the communities. But guess what? On Hispanic managing directors, we were flat, right? And we said that, right? Because transparency builds trust. People want to work at a company that doesn't just say words, and you're holding yourselves accountable. And we believe, we have incredibly talented people. We believe because we live our purpose, because we do these things, and we're willing to talk about them, even when we're not doing well or haven't made progress, that's why people want to come and join and stay at Accenture.
In our time remaining, I'd love to ask each of the panelists to talk a little bit about how we make sure we don't slide back, how we make sure that, as Ken mentioned, 110 is a 10-year commitment. That kind of long-termism is really valuable to initiatives like this. But I think we've all lived through enough recessions and downturns and now a pandemic to know that, for some organizations, when it gets really tough, sometimes these kinds of commitments are the things that fall by the wayside. So, Julie, I'll start with you and then ask the other panelists to chime in. You've made a really strong personal commitment to this. How do you make sure institutionally that Accenture continues to maintain that commitment?
Well, it goes to some of the things we've talked about. We call it sustainability by design, right? It's important that 110 has both CEOs and CHROs, because CEOs come and go. When you have a CHRO who builds into the talent processes, right, of how they're going to hire, that's much more likely, right, to survive because it's by design, right? And so these have to, the CEOs are absolutely critical, but it can't simply be a project, right? And so building in, as Neil did the way he built his company, I know that Ken did the same thing at American Express, right? These are things that are built into the process, the commitment, and the core values.
Ken?
So I think Julie's really said it all. It takes leadership, but leadership at every level of the organization. They have to feel accountability. They have to also understand that this is a core objective that is long-term. And the focus on institutionalizing it, I always say that you judge a CEO not just their tenure at the company, but what happens 3 to 4 years after. And one of the things that I'm very proud about is not just the continued very good financial performance, but also the continued improvement in diversity, that it was just recognized. It was a core issue. And one of the things I said to people, just as I did in the business, is the accountability has to be personal and it has to be institutional. And when we bring people into the organization, we should be asking them, particularly those in leadership positions, what did you do in your prior job in diversity? I started asking people this in the 90s, and I would tell you maybe 20% were able to say, here's what I was able to do. But that message got out there. And so I think you've got to institutionalize it. To Julie's point, you got to move, the leadership has to be throughout every level of the organization. And you have to say this is a core commitment, and the board has to be there.
And just, to add to that, Ken, I'm having the same conversations with Steve Squeri, who's now the CEO of American Express, that Ken and I had because of the continuity, right? The same is true, when I look at Merck, right? Ken Frazier also helped do that. And I'm talking to Rob about the same things because they survived beyond the CEO because they became a core part of who the company is.
Let me ask the question a little bit in a different way, because we started this conversation talking about how business has actually always played a really important role in societal change. Neil, do you think that we're actually going to see business engage more in societal issues? Is this period that we're seeing sort of a renaissance, and are we going to see a flourishing of business engagement in societal issues? And would be curious to get your sense of how that materializes.
Yeah, I think so, and we certainly saw it in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, right, where a lot of companies made public proclamations, and customers, employees, and the public sort of said, okay, well, what's behind these great statements? Put your money where your mouth is. And then we saw companies start to make financial commitments. And then there were additional questions of, okay, that's great, you're looking outwardly, but what about looking inwardly as a company? Because right, through social media, and all of our voices are amplified, which is a great thing, frankly, because it enables us to look ourselves in the mirror and hold ourselves accountable. So I think these trends in terms of what customers are looking for, what employees are looking for. In the age of the internet, you can't hide, and that's a good thing.
Right. We spend a lot of time talking about the role of business in society as it pertains to racial equity, but Maurice, I'd be curious to get a sense, and I'll give you the last word here, can 110 be a model for other societal challenges where it really makes sense for the business community to come together? We didn't really touch on climate. There are a lot of climate coalitions that are doing really good work, and I think in some ways we've seen business take a real lead here. But based on the structure you've put in place, could other societal issues take a page from 110 and apply them to women in the workforce, apply this solution to other education, other challenges that really would benefit from business's lens?
Absolutely, yeah. I think there are a number of issues where having a, using Julie's words, collective action, committed business community ready to put a moonshot on the table, stay committed for a period of time, really focus leadership internally and externally, work with partners, put together an ecosystem that includes the private sector and the public sector. Yes, that is a model that can and should be working on the biggest problems that plague our democracy today, whether it's the labor force and making it more inclusive, or climate change, or frankly, housing and a number of other economic development, economic mobility. I don't think we will be able to sustainably address and solve these issues if we don't have a committed coalition from the private sector willing to work on it and work on it for the long term.
We started with Thomas Watson, and you've taken us into the future. Maurice Jones, Neil Blumenthal, Ken Chenault, Julie Sweet, thank you all so much for your time today. Great session.
Thank you.
Nice to be with you.
Thank you.